You're listening to the Curious About Cannabis podcast.
Hi, my name is Tanja Bagar. I come from Slovenia. I studied microbiology for my bachelor's degree, and later I did a PhD in biomedicine, where I dealt mostly with molecular biology and biochemistry. And now for quite a number of years, I've been dealing intensely with cannabinoids, cannabis, hemp, and mostly the health benefits that these molecules can bring.
The Curious About Cannabis podcast is produced by Natural Learning Enterprises, a mission-driven company dedicated to enhancing critical thinking skills and public scientific literacy about life in the natural world. If you like Curious About Cannabis, consider checking out some of these other learning initiatives by Natural Learning Enterprises.
Come on, Molly! It'll be an adventure! Phoebe called out as she followed Brother Toadstool. Brother Toadstool led Phoebe and Molly into a tunnel that went deep down into the ground. As they climbed into the tunnel, they found themselves getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Our new children's book, A Toadstool's Treasures, takes young readers on an adventure into the fun and fascinating world of fungi. Learn more and find mycology-related learning resources, games, and lesson plans for teachers and homeschooling families at toadstoolstreasures.com. Biodiversity loss due to habitat loss and fragmentation is rapidly increasing around the world with devastating consequences. Learn how you can help contribute to native habitat corridors in your community and reconnect with your wild neighbors at gardenwild.org. Oregon recently became the first state in the United States to legalize the medical use of psilocybin. As cities all over the country begin to decriminalize the use of entheogenic plants and fungi, it's time to have a serious discussion about psychedelics. The Serious About Psychedelics limited series podcast is coming soon. Learn more at seriousaboutspsychedelics.com. You can learn more about Natural Learning Enterprises at naturaledu.com. And now, back to the show. Hey everybody, this is Jason Wilson with the Curious About Cannabis podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in once again. So today I'm really excited to finally be joining somebody that I've been collaborating with for years, and we've written papers and co-authored chapters, all sorts of things together, but we've never been able to sit down face-to-face and talk. I'm here with Dr. Tanja Bagar from the International Institute for Cannabinoids, and she's also a professor, does all sorts of great education work around cannabis. Thanks so much, Tanja, for being willing to talk to me all the way from Slovenia today, all about cannabis science and the endocannabinoid system and whatever else we get into today.
Thank you very much, Jason, for having me. I'm very honored to be able to talk to you, to be able to see you finally face to face and have a little chat live after, as you mentioned, we've been collaborating in different ways for quite some time.
Absolutely, yeah. And for those listening, we'll just kind of dive right in. Do you mind sharing a bit about your academic and scientific background and kind of what got you interested in cannabinoid science? And then from there, we can kind of spin out and talk about ICANNA as well as some of your more direct interests about the endocannabinoid system and all of that.
Yes, of course. So I studied microbiology for my bachelor's degree, and I later did my PhD from biomedicine. And all of my PhD thesis dealt with cellular signaling. And at that time, we studied mostly the signaling with calcium and pH signaling. And I had all kinds of courses on cellular biology, on receptors, and all kinds of ways of signaling. And you can imagine my surprise that now, when looking back, I see that nobody ever mentioned cannabinoids, the endocannabinoid system. We have known receptors. We had to draw each molecular bond for each neurotransmitter, but nobody ever mentioned we have an anandamide, endocannabinoids, a cannabinoid receptor. So I finished my PhD on this topic without knowing anything about cannabis. I wasn't interested. I was a very good and hardworking student, so I had zero cannabis experiences as such and zero knowledge about it. And then some years later, I had a job that dealt mostly with ecology, but I was always fascinated and curious, and I was always digging into papers on the way the cells. For me, cells are the most fascinating thing there is on this planet. I think that we could study it for millennia to come, the tiniest structures in our body, and still not know enough. And so,
Yes, yes.
yeah, so I was always constantly looking for it. And then I remember still this moment when I was at my job. The experiments were running, and I look at the PubMed and I go, "Oh, there's something. What this endocannabinoid system?" I was like, my first thought was, "This can't be true. If this was really true, I would know it. Of course, I would know it. I mean, I've dedicated my PhD to this." But then I couldn't, you know. It woke this curiosity in me, and I said, "Okay, I gotta learn more about this." And then I go and I see that there's not one paper, there's not 10 paper, there's not 1,000 paper, there's like 10,000s of paper on this topic. So, and since I don't know 1984, we've known about this. This is a little
Yes.
bit after I was born. We've known about this, and I have no clue about this. So for
And not to
me,
mention, like, with CB1 being one of the most dominant G protein coupled receptors in the brain, and you're talking about, you took all of these classes on cellular receptors, and obviously you studied G protein coupled
of
receptors,
course,
but then this huge piece missing
yeah.
from the curriculum.
Exactly, completely out. There nothing on it. So then the curiosity took the best of me, and I spent hours and hours secretly in the lab reading through papers, printing, marking, what is this? Uh, and this took about 2 years for me to be able to say that I've got quite this basic knowledge of what this endocannabinoid system is supposed to be, and the receptors of where they are, and what the function of these molecules and these receptors is in our body. And then I started attending a few conferences, and then I think the turning point was that at one of these conferences actually in Slovenia, I met a few parents that had children with severe epilepsy that couldn't be treated with conventional anti-epileptics. And they came to me with a question. So we hear that cannabis could help. We hear something about CBD. We're actually in a very dreaded situation. Nothing is helping. So do you think this could make sense, And then we sat with the parents for hours and hours, and we traveled with the parents to different doctors in Austria and other countries, because in Slovenia at that time there were no one really dealing with cannabinoids, especially not for children, but also not otherwise. And then I said, "Oh my God, if this could help, one child, it would be, I would feel like my life makes sense." Not
Yes.
let alone that we could then, of course, when one parent had success with CBD with their child, then more and more parents came, and then more and more patients came with questions. And I thought, wow, I mean, the thing was that it wasn't that these patients or parents were looking for a direct answer, so this is gonna cure me, or this is gonna cure my child. But it was, they came with a whole lot of, so people then, when they find kind of a health situation where conventional medicine doesn't have an answer for it, then they find all kinds of information, from cannabis to I don't know, spider poisons to scorpion
Oh,
toxins to
wow. Yeah.
everything possible. And for them, if you're not from a medical or at least biological field, this is completely overwhelming, and you have no way to orient yourself what makes sense even at the basic level and what not. And this is actually what they're looking for. They were looking for an answer. Does this even closely make sense, or can it even hurt my child or
Right.
myself in this health situation? And so my thought was, if we could at least help them through these first hurdles, to answer these first basic questions, not to give them an instant answer for all of their health issues, but to help them move in the right direction, that this would be already a lot done. And with this in mind, then we started thinking that because there were actually no proper organizations at that time working in Slovenia. So we decided that we form this institute, ICANNA, that primarily functions as a connecting base for people who are working in this field. Is it researchers, medical doctors, anyone who's willing to cooperate and really live this somewhere where patients could primarily benefit from it.
Yeah, and how have things evolved since those early days of working with those first parents and trying to get them help? I guess first of all, what were you able to see the outcomes with those children? Like, or did you just sort of facilitate the information? Did you actually see kind of if they got help or not? And how has that evolved to today? Because ICANNA has been operating now for, I don't know what, like 5 years or so?
Yeah, exactly.
It's been a little while. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we have still contact with some of these parents, and 50% of the children that started with CBD actually got significant improvement in epileptic seizures or are completely seizure free.
Wow.
And we have to consider that this is children that had refractory epilepsy. So they were resistant to at least 3 medications. Some of them tried 7 and more anti-epileptic medications before trying CBD. So these were really, really difficult cases, not some light seizures. So really difficult cases. And to see an improvement here with children that had 100+ seizures a day, to be able to really breathe and live again, which was completely impossible before, it's beyond words. Yes, it's incredible what so we have seen a lot of quite a number of these cases. And I have to say that especially in Slovenia, in the field of pediatric neurology, a lot has changed since then. There was one doctor in a pediatric neurologist called Dr. David Neubauer, who is also a member of ICANNA, and he's been treating these children, and he is actually the one that was the first doctor who started to listen to their patients and said, okay, I don't know anything about this, but I'm willing to learn. And now he has really moved barriers and amazing things since in Slovenia. And you can imagine that this is actually, let's say, the most sensitive area. So it's children and it's neurological conditions, which is usually where most say no cannabis, no cannabinoids. And here, exactly in this most sensitive part, he has been able to do really wonders. He has since also published studies that they have done at the pediatric clinic in Ljubljana. And he has seen, actually, they usually start with CBD also with children who do not respond well to other anti-epileptic medications. And they also see about the same. In 50% of cases, they see either drastic reduction or the seizures completely stopping. Then they have seen zero. So no one gets worse when they start taking CBD.
I see. Yeah.
And then there's some that you see that they have, let's say, better cognitive function, better sleep, but maybe not a reduction in the seizures. But nobody gets worse. And I say at least half or more get significant improvement in their epilepsy.
That's really incredible. And what types of CBD products are these children being given? Is it like isolated CBD, or is it a CBD rich extract?
Yeah, so this is another story that has also been evolving. So when they started, there was practically nothing available in Slovenia, and majority of these parents traveled somewhere abroad to either Netherlands or Germany to try to purchase something that would make sense. There was also very little analytical possibilities to test what you've actually
Yeah.
purchased at all. But the first children were actually treated with an isolate.
Mm-hmm.
And then later they were even the pediatric clinic now can prescribe a full spectrum CBD, and then the parents go out and buy it as some even imported the Charlotte's Web from the States. There are also some very good producers in Slovenia that test everything, that grow hemp ecologically and produce CBD drops from these Slovenia grown hemp.
Nice.
And he says that they have seen for example in the group of children that did not respond to isolate of CBD, when they started giving them full spectrum, they saw an improvement in epileptic. So they can definitely see that a full spectrum functions much better than an isolate, which we anyway know.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things that every professional that I talk to that works with patients, I hear that same story over and over again, that usually they start with isolate because that's just where they have to start. And they inevitably discover that these, sort of full spectrum extracts tend to perform better, which is very interesting. And there's some preclinical data that sort of, backs that up. There's been some studies looking at inflammation markers and stuff that show that the dose response curves are very different between isolate and full spectrum extract. And that's something I've been really wanting to understand more. I spoke with Dady Miri recently for the podcast. Wonderful. I haven't released the episode yet, but the work that they're doing, trying to really analyze all of, they have a method now where they can analyze like 140 cannabinoids in a product.
I know,
and
I'm so jealous.
Me too. Yeah, I know.
I'm like,
it's like,
oh no.
And like out here in the United States, lab testing has been going on technically for about 10 years, but really more 5 or 6 years as states have legalized and that sort of thing. And, we're testing for maybe at best a dozen cannabinoids and maybe a couple dozen terpenes. And so it's, I don't know, sometimes you feel like you're working in the dark a little bit.
Yes, the same in Slovenia. I think we have a handful of labs. Okay, so we're a small country to start with, but it's also the same. Some test for 6. In best case, they test for maybe 12 cannabinoids. And then even if you go, I want to have the acids tested apart from the carboxylate, then it's already, oh God, no. And then I've been to several talks of Dr. Meiri, and then when he shows these tables with, I'm like, oh heaven, this is what we need.
Yes, I know. When I talked to him, I was like, we have to figure out ways to replicate the model that they're doing in Israel. It's so fascinating. The way that the healthcare system and the testing labs and the universities, like everything is connected. And so that data sharing is incredible. And I hope to see that spread. But that sort of relates to one thing I wanted to talk about ICANNA is that one of ICANNA's missions is to promote this international collaboration, to try to, see what's going on in all of these different countries and to try to share that information and bring people together. And so I guess one thing that I wanted to get a sense of, because I'm not out there, is how how the cannabis environment differs between like Slovenia, Austria, Croatia, all of these nearby countries, that, you know, you're all working together, but I imagine there's probably kind of a patchwork of cannabis laws and that sort of thing that makes things a little challenging to do research and that sort of thing.
Yeah, very true. So generally, there are some laws that are governing the entire European Union, but it seems that the interpretation of the same laws is, for example, very different in each country inside the European Union. Because so Slovenia, it seems that we are one of the most strict countries, especially when it comes to cannabis. For example, the Slovenian government and the Austrian government use the same law statement. And in Slovenia, the explanation is that we're not allowed to grow cannabis, anything that is not agricultural hemp. And in Austria, they use the same argument to say that they can grow and sell a cannabis plant until they are harvested. And they use exactly the same line out of the convention to state that we can't and they can. So it's crazy. I'm really hoping now that, and then, for example, also when it comes to growing hemp as an agricultural crop, in Slovenia, we have a limit of 0.2 THC that we can grow. In Austria, they have 0.3. In Italy, they have 0.6. In Switzerland,
oh wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, in Switzerland, they have 1%. So it's, it's, each country does its own thing. I'm really happy and grateful that now we have this EHA organization. It's European Association for Hemp, and they have been really trying to push for legislation that would cover the entire European Union, because then it's also very hard to export products, because then they are okay in one country and not okay in 3 others, and it's really, really hard to be to be on the market. And then last year, for example, we had this novel food situation. And then it was also this so some countries said, okay, this means that the entire CBD industry is banned and all the products have to go off the market. And some said, okay, we're fine with this, we're not going to do anything. So it was a whole, also very, very different responses to the same statement that the European Union decided on. So it's very hard to, and also when we look at research, when we apply for different, let's say, how do you say this in English? So we need an allowance to do some research, right?
Right,
so
like a license or something.
Exactly. Yeah. So if we ask for it in Slovenia, in Austria, in somewhere else, it's completely different what we need to, what are the rules, or what are the requirements we need to have in able to do research. So it's quite a challenge with these molecules and this plant in all of Europe. I'm hoping now, it was yesterday that there was a good move forward. I believe that the World Health Organization decided to reschedule cannabis. So I'm hoping that will bring some loosening, at least as far as medical use and research possibilities for cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that, and I was excited to see that the WHO had made that move. And I'd seen, back in 2017 or 2018 when they wrote up a report about CBD, and they were pretty seemed to be relatively supportive of acknowledging that CBD was safe and ought to be allowed to be traded and that sort of thing. And then seeing what the UN did, it is exciting. And it's interesting because, like, in the European Union, you have some similar dynamics to what we have in the United States, in that you have, in the United States, every state does things differently. The federal government has a rule, but then every state's interpreting those rules differently. and you can't cross state lines with material. It's this whole thing. So it's a fascinating parallel to see, and I do hope that there's some standardization there to make it easier. Because, for instance, you're talking about like places that allow hemp with 0.6 or 1%, which that's very progressive and exciting to hear, because that's what we're fighting for in the United States, is to try to allow hemp to have up to 1% THC, to make it
which
much
would
more.
Make sense.
Yeah, I mean, the 0.3% limit was very arbitrary to begin with when it was published, and so it would make a lot of very interesting research possible at that point. But
just to say, for example, in Slovenia, we have some hemp varieties that are typically Slovene, or how do you say that? They come from Slovenia. Or ex-Yugoslavia, and we're not allowed to grow them because sometimes, some years when it's very sunny, it goes over the 0.2 line. So we're not allowed to grow our own hemp varieties, which is really big.
Yeah, that's a shame. I hope the germplasm for all of that is well kept, so that when you can grow it, it'll be there.
The biotechnical faculty in Ljubljana is storing some of these seeds that are home Slovene. Some also hoping, but for now we're it was shown that some years where it was really dry and very sunny, it came to 0.6. So this was, our limit is 0.2. So this was like way out of proportions for for growing in Slovenia.
Yeah, and I have to say, if anyone's not familiar with Slovenia, I've got to travel out there eventually, because it looks like a beautiful place. And just as a biologist, I've studied the biodiversity of Slovenia, and it's an incredible place. Just when it comes to just all of the surrounding life, it's a nice little pocket of just extreme biodiversity. It's really incredible.
Yeah, it's true. When you come, I will volunteer to be your guide. I actually live in Natura 2000 conserved area. So it's like a national park in the northeast of Slovenia. So there's a lot of biodiversity still to be seen here.
Yeah, and that makes me think about, in sort of in a weird way, segue to the next idea I want to talk about, which is one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, is how molecules in other plants affect the endocannabinoid system. And so one reason why I live where I live right now is because the area of the United States where I live right now is one of the major biodiversity hotspots in the United States. And one thing I want to, over the next couple of years, try to transition to researching is doing sort of looking more closely at the molecules in other plants, try to find things that might sort of have some similar characteristics to cannabinoids, compounds that might have that are tricyclic or bicyclic, that have a similar dynamics, and try to understand how they might be influencing the endocannabinoid system. So one thing I wanted to ask you, because you teach about the endocannabinoid system a lot, beyond just the, I guess your experience with patients, but on a cellular biology level, what is it about the endocannabinoid system that really fascinates you, that you really find interesting, that you like to study?
So for me, the most fascinating part of it is trying to really understand now, from what we understand now, this function that the endocannabinoid system has. I think it's unlike any other system we have in our bodies. So if I explain the way I imagine it in my my head, is like, usually a house has these electrical fuses where the electricity comes into the house. And I imagine that the endocannabinoid system, or the cannabinoids, are something like that. So in the house, when there's a huge electricity wave coming in, it's gonna burn out, and it's gonna keep the electricity out, preventing it from burning all kinds of appliances in the house. And I imagine that the endocannabinoid system does something like this, that when there is something that challenges or poses a threat to our biochemistry, our balance in the cells, organs, tissues, the endocannabinoids are produced and they activate all possible systems, whatever it takes to get our cells back into the balance. And I think that there's nothing comparable to this, you know. The immune system does something similar, but just for bacteria, viruses, and parasites, you know. And this, you know, it was shown that the endocannabinoid system produces endocannabinoids even for emotional stress, you know. Even if we, if something, I don't know, upsets us in traffic, or we have a fight with our spouse, or the boss gets our nerves, or whatever, it doesn't make a difference what the challenge is or what is threatening our biochemistry, so to speak. We produce these molecules, and I imagine that when because we know that they're basically signaling molecules.
Yes. Yeah.
So I imagine it, you know, that when something happens in our body and we produce endocannabinoids, that they just send this message out there to other cells and bacteria and everything else living inside of us to do whatever it takes to bring us back into balance. And this can mean that we need to detoxify if we breathe it in too much PM10 particles. This can mean that they activate the immune system if we have an infection. This can mean that they produce a lot of anti-inflammatory molecules if our joints are inflamed. It doesn't really matter. And this wisdom, you know, this kind of intelligence, that there is something created that keeps us functioning no matter how crazy the world out there is. I think it's so amazing. I think it shows so much, I don't know, intelligence in creating our bodies, our cells, because especially now when we see that the world is becoming more and more challenging to live with, to live in, not with, to have something that can really safeguard our biochemistry, our basic cells. I think it's beyond imaginably wise and beautiful that we would have something like this. And this is one of the things that when we look, and then when we know that this exists inside of our bodies, that this is a part of us, to start, if you always keep this in mind, you know, that you function in a way that supports this system, that even if we're challenged with some kind of disease and we have to take medications or do something, that if we keep in mind to do things to then keep this endocannabinoid system functioning, I think it's a complete game changer, that we don't fight symptoms anymore, that we don't deal only with the pain or only with the inflammation, but that we always keep in mind, okay, so we have this endocannabinoid system that I always imagine like the top boss of all the biochemistry. You know, this is like the toppest guy you can talk to in the body. And there is no health on the long term if the endocannabinoid system is not functioning properly. So, okay, you address the pain, you address this, everything, but you have to start talking to the big guy, because without that, and this is what, you know, this is beyond fascinational for me, to have something like this, and that we now understand it enough that we actually can start influencing it. You know, we can start supporting its function, not only through phytocannabinoids, but also through, I don't know, essential fatty acids, prebiotics, probiotics, healthy gut. Just there is already a lot that we know that supports the function of the endocannabinoid system. Just to know, I think that everyone should know that. For example, now in Slovenia it's winter time, you know, and now especially because it's COVID situation, but also in other years there was always this flu and seasonal infection
Hmm.
stories, and it was always build your immune system for the winter. Yeah,
Yep.
that the immune system is also under the influence of endocannabinoid system, and you also can't have a really good immune system if your endocannabinoid system is failing. So to know that we have this and to really start behaving kindly towards it and support its function, I think it would change everything, how our bodies function and how well we are able to cope with the challenges that are a daily fact.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you've pointed out some major things. I mean, one of the things is I'm preparing to teach a cannabinoid science class next semester, so this is all directly at the forefront of my
Yay!
brain. Yeah, yeah. But just
Wonderful.
this concept of stress, and how stress influences the endocannabinoid system is just like you said. It doesn't have to be physical stress; it can be psychological stress. It's stress in general. It
Mm.
tends to um, promote the body either to make more endocannabinoids or to overexpress cannabinoid receptors,
Mm.
with the idea that those sort of and this isn't really the right language, but there's not a good language to talk about it, but those receptors sort of want to be satisfied,
Mm.
so that they can downregulate again.
Yeah.
um, and so you're right that it a lot of times we talk about cannabinoids having this role in homeostasis, um, and I think sometimes we talk about it so much that we often don't explain to people like what that means, like what how that sort of presents itself. But it's true. Like you look at a lot of diseased tissues, they
Mm.
often upregulate certain types of cannabinoid receptors. And then
Exactly.
also, when you think about things like TRPV1 receptors or PPAR gamma receptors
Mm.
and all these other things. I mean, one thing that's fascinating to me is that cannabinoids influence so many different receptors in the body,
Mm.
and in that their activity at cannabinoid receptors highlights the importance of those receptors in the body. But it also highlights like it's sort of unusual to see molecules that are this promiscuous in their
Mm.
activity.
True.
And I talked to Dr. Vincenzo DiMarzo about this a few weeks ago or so, about a month ago, and he was saying that a lot of his research right now is studying the endocannabinoid dome, so this expanded
Mm.
concept. But he was like, even that doesn't explain everything that just CBD
Yeah.
does.
It
And
doesn't
so
do it
he's like,
justice, even if you do the at the end, right? It
yeah,
doesn't do it justice. Yeah.
and it just shows how it just, for whatever reason, and I'm really interested in understanding this, like what is it about the structure of these molecules that gives them these characteristics. But they transcend the endocannabinoid system, they transcend the endocannabinoid dome, they tug and influence just so, and it's really hard to put into words just how wide
Mm.
reaching these effects are, and that they do affect every part of our physiological
Yeah.
functioning in some way. And then
Yeah.
you mentioned the fatty acid component. So the cannabinoid science is sort of explaining why good diet and exercise is important for you. It like
Mm.
provides the molecular mechanisms to understand on a deeper level what those things are actually doing to influence your health. And so,
Mm.
I think I don't know how long it'll take for all of this to reach mainstream medical schools and hospitals and that sort of thing. But you and I that have spent years, reading all of this and studying it, and you have that moment where it clicks, and
Yes.
you're like, oh my god, like this is a
Exactly.
a really huge thing. Like this is Nobel Prize worthy. Like this is
Yeah.
a major shift in how we think about health and human
Mm.
physiology. When that happens on a bigger scale for more physicians, more
Mm.
pharmacists, and that sort of thing, I think we're going to see a drastic change in the way that that sort of healthcare is approached in general. It's in drug development and everything else. It's going to be a really fascinating future. I just worry it's going to take way longer to get to that point than we would like.
Yeah, that's true. For me, it's also, I believe that it's gonna be, yeah, a major shift. But okay, because of the complexity, there's always gonna be so much more to study. You know,
Yes.
This is like a never-ending Pandora's box where you can always look at another thing. And I'm sure that whatever we're gonna choose to look at, the cannabinoids are gonna affect it in one way or another.
Yeah.
But already, if we take what we know now, you know, we could already use this, what we know, and do something with it in medicine. But I'm not saying that every doctor should prescribe cannabinoids. But I'm saying that there shouldn't be a doctor that doesn't know that we have this, you know?
Yes.
There shouldn't be a doctor that does not know what a medication, you know, for me, it was also a little bit surprising and a little bit worrying that there's so many medications that we use today that we are prescribing or even that we can buy over the counter that affect the endocannabinoid system. And we don't know. And if we're using them for a long time, it can affect, and there's nobody speaking about it. For example, for me, at least in Slovenia, we can buy this paracetamol, what is it? Like a syrup for children, you know, when they're little, for fever, for teething.
Right.
Yeah, and there's quite a number of parents that are giving them this paracetamol because it's very sweet syrup, you know, the children like it. It's a little bit pink in Slovenia. And so they give it in the nighttime so that they sleep better because the teeth aren't gonna hurt and they're not gonna. And they keep doing that like for months and months. And we know paracetamol affects the production of anandamide, you know? And nobody ever mentions, okay, like this sweet pink little syrup does something to the endocannabinoid system of your child. And okay, I mean, I don't say that we're not supposed to use it at all, but to have the awareness that it does something else as well besides just maybe reducing the pain of the teeth coming out, especially if it's used on the long run. And it's very similar also with many other medications, even the antibiotics, even the anti-inflammatories, everything. And that the pharmacists and the doctors would have this awareness that if they're prescribing something that may challenge the endocannabinoid system, that then there should be some special care given to keep it upright or restore its function once we're not using this anymore. Because I think that a little bit of this is already happening with antibiotics. You know, they say, okay, if you're using antibiotics, have a little probiotics or take care of your gut flora. And I think that the same logic should start to be applied also with other medication and endocannabinoid system. But that can't happen because I think that, at least here in Slovenia, there's not a single doctor that comes out of medical school knowing anything about the endocannabinoid system. And this is a huge gap.
Huge. And it blows my mind too, because, you know, you can think about what you would be exposed to in medical school. And, you know, you get exposed to the functions of leukotrienes and prostaglandins and all of these sort of similar signaling molecules that control immune function, inflammation, and different things like that. And endocannabinoids are quite similar to those, you know, icosanoid kind of compounds. And so, you know, doctors are already being exposed to essentially a class of compounds that overlap with endocannabinoids. You could think of endocannabinoids as icosanoids to a large degree. They're built on demand. They generally affect cells and tissues and things locally. But then, to have that just gap that you learn a piece of the puzzle, but then this other piece of the puzzle is just totally ignored. I agree. I think that it'll take an extremely long time. We'll be studying. It's like a fractal, a never-ending thing that, you know, we're gonna. When it's like you said, just cellular biology in general and pharmacology is like this. That the deeper you go and the more you study, the more mystery you uncover, and then there's more to study, and and you keep going. But I totally agree that even just, and I actually talked about this on a recent episode, that just acknowledging that these dynamics are at play can really change the way that a healthcare provider thinks about treating a patient, even if it's something as simple as, okay, you're going to be on this medication that might disrupt normal endocannabinoid signaling or something. So at least take some omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids.
Exactly.
Just so that your body has the precursors to build these things.
Exactly my point, yes.
Yes. Yeah. It's just something as simple as that could be very life-changing for people. And I agree that I do also worry about the chronic use of medications and the unique side effects that we see from the chronic use of different types of drugs. I mean, one thing that's been on my mind, if anything, if a medication is like antagonizing cannabinoid receptors, well, then you see side effects like suicidal ideation and depression and things like that. Well, you see those side effects in a lot of psychiatric and anxiety medications and things like that. So it really makes you wonder. I mean, obviously they're affecting serotonin and all sorts of other things, but also how are they affecting CB1 receptors, and are they antagonizing them? And if you're antagonizing CB1 receptors for a long time, like, that's definitely something you don't want to do. You've got to give it a break. So I'm right there with you. It's a big concern that it's a huge gap in our understanding. How do our current drugs affect the endocannabinoid system? And we really don't know.
Yeah. And this I think should be really closely looked at, because there was a time when it was so a lot of focus was given recently, at least here in Slovenia. The doctors were very very concerned about patients using cannabinoids without them knowing it, and and the CBD is affecting how the other drugs are metabolized. So that's one of the truth as well. Of course, one should be definitely careful about using together CBD or other cannabinoids with medications, but also the other way around. What are the medications doing to our own CBD?
Yeah. Right.
So it's
absolutely. And it's another thing that I'm wondering about too. I don't know if you're seeing it in Europe, but in the United States, basically starting last year, this year, hemp crops that are really dominant in CBG are being grown. And part of that is because CBG plants tend to have even lower concentrations of THC, just in the nature of how the plant synthesizes those compounds. And so we're about to see a lot of CBG products hit the market. And that's something we don't really understand very well, is like, how does CBG influence some of those enzymatic pathways compared to CBD? Are they more potent or not? We know that generally all phytocannabinoids influence those cytochrome P450 enzymes to some degree, and CBD seems to be the more potent of the phytocannabinoids, in that degree. But what about CBG? But then it's sort of a double-edged thing, because you could also use that manipulation to your advantage to potentially prescribe less of a drug that may have harmful side effects.
Exactly.
If you understand that dynamic.
We see a little bit of this trend in Europe as well. A little bit of the CBG coming, still very much less than CBD, but it's coming. But this is definitely a very, for example, they have noticed this very strongly with patients in epilepsy again, that many of the anti-epileptics can be used in much lower concentrations if CBD is added, because it slows down the metabolism of the drug. And they have actually seen, as you say, much, when you know this and you know how to combine the CBD with the anti-epileptic, you can reduce the drug dose and still get the same effects. And for example, with anti-epileptics, the side effects are quite severe, and this is a very important consideration. And this con is actually a pro if you know how to use it and work with it. So
Absolutely, yeah. And looking forward, what are some areas of cannabinoid research that you, I guess, are most excited about following and seeing play out over the next several years?
So there's two that I am super excited about. So one is also actually was inspired by one of the speeches that Dr. David Meiri gave in Israel, and he showed how different strains, or this, I call them rather chemotypes or of cannabis, affect different medical situations. And they showed first in cell lines and then also in patients that different chemovars, for example, inhibit 100% growth of, let's say, prostata cancer cells, but they do nothing for the breast cancer cells. And vice versa. There was another strain that inhibited 100% growth of the, cervix cancer, but did nothing to the lung cancer. And this is where I think that one of the major breakthroughs should, or I'm hoping also will happen, that when we find these links, when we say, okay, this genotype grown like this, we know at least it has a huge potential for this, and this, but doesn't do much for this. And we know exactly that there's another group that holds, at least in the lab, they can show great potential, for example, for breast cancer and this type and this type. And this linking the chemotype with a certain specific disease, I think this would be a huge benefit for the patients, because now I see that with patients, there is usually, I see exactly this kind of response. Sometimes when you don't, well, now we're mostly just guessing, when it comes to chemotypes and specific conditions. And we see like this, sometimes the cannabinoid medication really works like wonders. It's really like beyond miraculous. They take something and a week later they feel a little bit better and their health just keeps climbing. And sometimes they see a little bit of improvement, and sometimes together with conventional therapy it gets better, and they do better with the cannabinoids than without them. And for some it doesn't do anything. And I think, and then sometimes the medicine is trying to explain it in a way that we have responders and not responders. But in my perception, this doesn't make sense, because we all have cannabinoid receptors. How are we going to be non-responders? We have just not gotten this specific ratio of cannabinoids versus terpene versus this whole bouquet of 1,000 molecules. We haven't got it right. This is why there hasn't been a response. And if we would match this a little bit closer, I think this would be a tremendous step forward in this. And we have this, there's so many varieties, and I'm sure that it wouldn't be so difficult to map, I don't know, this group of varieties is good for inflammatory conditions, this one is good for this and this cancerous conditions. Even if I would go very far, like in my wildest dreams kind of direction, if you want to confirm that you have a diagnosis of cancer, they always take either surgery or at least a biopsy. And if we could take that piece into a lab and put 200 different chemotypes of extracts on it, we could see exactly which one does 100% reduction of growth or kills everything in 48 hours. And then we could just give it to the patient. This would be my this would be my wildest dreams, that we would have this arsenal of medications available, this full spectrum extracts, and then be able to match it with the response of a patient.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I think we're getting close. I spoke to Arno Hazekamp not too long ago, who, proposed this idea of chemovars. And he was saying that he's like, we have a perception that there are hundreds or thousands of different strains. And he said, there's probably 25 to 50, maybe 100, really unique chemovars. And he said, we just have all these names floating around and we haven't characterized them very well. He said, but when the data set gets big enough, we should notice these patterns and these groupings. And then we can compare any product we get to those groupings and say, okay, this chemotype of this extract fits into group C. And we know, because we've done a lot of study on that chemotype that group C represents, that it tends to be, effective on these cell lines. And because of our clinical data, we also know that that translates to humans. So, I mean, the foundation is being laid to get there. And I think to sort of tie this up with a lot of things we've already said, when the analytical tools improve and are more widely available, when we get better communication and education between healthcare professionals and the folks working in the analytical labs and the folks working in, doing other types of research, and getting that information sharing going, it will accelerate. That progress will accelerate quite a lot. And just, Miri's lab is going to announce, I think, next year at a conference. He already talked about it on the podcast, but I know he's headlining some conference where he's talking about progress they've made in leukemia cells, where they've discovered certain blends of like 3 cannabinoids tend to be extremely effective for the certain type of, leukemia cell. So, that's the beginning. That's where it starts. So we're getting there. And then you mentioned there was something else you were really excited about as well.
Yeah. So for me, one of the other very fascinating fields is how to affect the productions of endocannabinoids locally,
Yes. Yeah.
So to also, preferably not with chemicals, but with other plant compounds, if you have a inflamed joint or something locally, because that's the way that cannabinoids would function also in our bodies. They would be produced very locally, not systemically. And if we could somehow mimic this, that if we see something going on in a certain part of the body, that we could maybe transdermally or somehow bring it to that spot and influence the production of endocannabinoids right there.
Yes, that's huge. And I think something that we didn't talk about specifically, but I think is worth mentioning because it's often underappreciated, is that endocannabinoids and cannabinoid receptors often do different things in different cells and different types of tissues. And so we often get this idea that we just need to take oral cannabinoids
and huge
get cannabinoids,
amounts, no?
mega doses, and get them like going all through our bodies. And that's going to, a lot of times the term like stimulating the endocannabinoid system or activating the endocannabinoid system is used. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily what you want. Like you really want targeted action, and sometimes overstimulating parts of the endocannabinoid system, whether it's cannabinoid receptors or the production of endocannabinoids themselves, which will then stimulate those receptors, like that can be bad. You can we're learning that some metabolic conditions may be associated with an overactive endocannabinoid system. And so I think a lot of times we tend to talk about deficiencies and we don't talk enough about the other side of endocannabinoid system derangements, which is, the overexpression, overactivity. And so if that's a huge challenge, how do you get cannabinoids where you want them, or how do you stimulate the production of endocannabinoids where you want them and nowhere else? I totally agree with you that's on the forefront. That is kind of the frontier we're at now. It's like, got a basic understanding of what's going on, how it can influence health, but now how do we manipulate it in a targeted way?
Exactly. How do we work with it? How do we do it, or how do we maybe influence its function where we see that it's not doing what we want it to do anymore, or where its function is kind of impaired and we want to get it. This is
absolutely.
And I always say, when patients are asking, how do I use it, or when it's, for example, for preventive reasons, like for managing stress better, always think about how the body would do it in an ideal case and try to mimic
Mhm.
that, and the body is never going to produce a huge amount of cannabinoid that will be floating all over the body. It just
Yep.
wouldn't. And that's not how these molecules work. And it's different when you're, I don't know, managing a chronic infection all over the
Yeah.
body, or if you're trying to manage malignant situations or something like that. But if you're trying to work with your body, then it's, I, for stress management or for things like that, I always say, if you're having a great day, you don't need any cannabinoids. Your body is doing what it should be doing. If you know that your way if you know that your day is going to be hard and long and you have meetings or travel, then take a little bit of CBD. It's going to do the protective function. And if you think your day is going to be fine and you find yourself being overwhelmed and kind of thrown off the wagon 10 times before it's noon, then the first chance you get, take a lot of CBD and try to cope with the damage. Because in ideal case situations, when you're over the top, your body would produce much more than on a great day when you're just relaxed and you feel like you're floating with the
Yeah.
flow and everything is going well. And just trying to keep in mind what the body would do in an ideal case and try to go with that, try to mimic
Yep.
that or support that function that the body would do in an ideal case scenario.
Yeah. And then that also relates to another sort of area that is at the front of cannabinoid science, which is we have to develop better tools to measure the activity of the
Yeah,
endocannabinoid system. And that is a really tough one because
true.
beyond spinal taps and biopsies, it's very difficult. But I do
Yeah.
have hope that we'll get there. I think that as we understand a lot of these dynamics more, there's a possibility we may be able to measure corollary compounds that are easier to measure that have some correlation to endocannabinoid activity or something, even if it's maybe um, measuring other, acylethanolamines or something
Mm,
that maybe are easier to get a grasp on, but maybe we can understand that if the body's producing these, then it's probably also producing,
yeah.
anandamide or something. But it's a really tough challenge, and so I love the way you've wrapped this all up because you've really highlighted like the big areas that a lot of minds are starting to focus on, which is how do we get these chemotypes associated with targeted action and clinical use? How do we, in a very direct, targeted way, influence the endocannabinoid system the way we want and
Mm,
where we want it? And then this other piece, how do we measure it all and
yeah.
and tie that all together? I mean, I do think that's pretty much where we're at. Of like that's what excites me too. Those are the big pieces around the corner. Um,
Yeah.
and I know I've kept you for almost an hour now, so I want to start to wrap things up and let you go eat dinner and enjoy your night. 'Cause I know we're on a big time difference here, but to sort of wrap things up, I mean, I wanted to make sure to talk about your books. So you just
Ah,
fairly recently published a book in 2 languages now, so it's in German and Slovene, right? And
yeah.
then you have an English version coming soon.
Exactly. So the German book was released last year, and it was also written and based on an invitation from a publishing house in Austria, in Germany. And then it took quite a while for me to get it into Slovene language, because for me Slovene is quite Slovene is quite a difficult language. So it's now actually in about 10 days gonna be coming out of the printing, the
Nice.
Slovene book. So at the web page of ICANNA, it's already possible to pre-order it, and it's gonna be out in about 10 days. It's gonna be actually physically available. And the English version is also these uh, both all three languages actually cover kind of the basic um, the basic, a little bit about the endocannabinoid system, a little bit about prevention, and then it touches upon a few medical fields that I think that are maybe most important or mostly asked about. This is mostly meant as kind of a guide for people who are curious about the effects for specific medical conditions. I think that
Mm.
my idea was that this book will be helpful to patients. It's not to really go deep into the science of it. I tried to keep a very simple language so that anybody can just look at it and see, okay, I've got this and this. Does it make sense to use it? And this
Mhm.
is that's why it's, for example, it covers a little bit on the immune system. It covers a little bit on the gut health. It covers a little bit on neurological conditions, also, of course, cancer conditions, and a little bit if and how we can use cannabinoids for prevention, so to keep us
Mhm.
healthy. So it's very easily understandable. It's gonna be like maybe 140 pages. It's not like
Mhm.
a really huge thing. It's kind of digestible. And then, of
Yeah.
course, I provide literature so people can go and, of course, dive deeply as they want to. But so that kind of anybody can just take it and get an idea of what this is all about, and if it makes sense for them or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. And are the titles the same between languages? What's the German title and the Slovenian title? And then how does that translate to English? Because depending on where someone is that's
Yeah.
listening to this, they could be in any of those places.
Yeah, it's true. So the German title is Hanfmedizin. This translates directly to cannabis as medicine.
Hmm.
And then the title in Slovene will be Konoplja v medicini. This would translate cannabis in medicine, like
Okay.
in the field of medicine.
Right.
And the English title, I have not fully decided yet. I think, the thing is that in the English speaking world, there's quite a lot of great books, including yours, on
Oh, thank you.
cannabis. So it's very hard to choose a title that kind of still is available or still makes sense to be chosen. So I think
Yeah,
that
well, I can relate to that. Yeah.
yeah, it's not easy, right? So, but I think it will also be. It has to be something very general, because
Mhm.
it's not a very specific book that would go into details on anything specific. It's supposed to cover general an idea. So it will be probably something like cannabis in medicine, or the potential of cannabis in medicine, something like
Hmm.
this. But the title in English has not been set yet.
Awesome. Well, I'll look forward to that. I can't wait to get my hands on it and check it out and promote it. I also want to give you the chance, let people know how to learn more about ICANNA, and really anything else as we start to wind down here. Anything that you want to share with people, if you have any events coming up or just anything. I basically will hand the platform over to you to kind of finish this out, and yeah, let people know what's going on in your world and how they can learn more.
Yeah, so to learn more about ICANNA, you can just visit the webpage of International Institute for Cannabinoids. ICANNA is the web page. There we post a lot what's going on there. There are unfortunately no live lectures going on in Slovenia or anywhere else. We usually held quite a number of those. Probably each month, at least one lecture was held for either patients or public or even doctors, but now this has all been a little held back.
Yep.
Yeah, what we're trying to do now also is we're trying to organize doctors that are willing to do counseling for patients online.
Mm-hmm.
We've organized ourselves something that we call cannabinoid-clinic.com. And we're trying to get doctors from different fields of medicine, also from different countries, that where patients can come, they can send their medical documentations. We look over it, see all the drug interactions, and just simply suggest if cannabis makes sense or not, and suggest what kind of preparations, what kind of routes to take it. So this is what we've been also working very hard on, because we have seen, at least in this part of the world, there's a huge lack of generally doctors where patients of any kind of medical field could get information on it, or specifically, so does it make sense? Can I use it? I'm using 6 medications. Can I use CBD to go along with it? And this is what we've been trying to overcome, or at least offer a place where this can be done. Also in these times when when
everything is over the internet now. I know. Yeah, it's a weird time, but that's really exciting. It's nice to use the situation we find ourselves in to kind of find a way to leverage that to do some interesting things. And I really think that type of work is very needed. I was talking to someone just yesterday about about this concept of telemedicine and the potential to be able to connect people to healthcare professionals that actually have some knowledge about cannabinoids and everything, so that they can ask those questions. Because one of the comments a lot of people say to me is that, well, I want to talk to my doctor about cannabis or cannabinoids, but they don't know anything. And so it's not going to be a productive conversation. So that's really exciting. I'm glad that you're working on that. That's a much needed resource for sure. So excited to see that. And I'm excited when things calm down and travel is possible and feasible again. I had hoped to do a lot of travel this year and wanted to make it out to Europe and had all sorts of plans, but hopefully maybe late next year, or who knows.
Who knows,
I really miss being in front of people and teaching and interacting with people face to face and all of that. So
it's very different holding a course over I've also been lecturing now for the students, and it's a completely different experience for them and for me. It's completely incomparable to being there face to face, debates developing, questions being answered, popped out. I think also students as such will have much less from the courses when they're held
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I think, it's nice that we have the technology to be able to communicate like this and share information, but absolutely there are elements lost that you can't recreate virtually. That is a huge part of teaching. It's one reason why I am passionate about teaching. That dynamic, that feedback loop that gets created. It's a beautiful thing. Fingers crossed we get back to that very soon. But I don't want to keep you any longer. Thanks so much, Tanja, for being willing to talk to me for well over an hour today. And I'm sure we'll get to talk again soon. And I definitely want to connect with some of the other folks at ICANNA and hear about their experiences and everything, and really start to share with our listeners more of what's going on beyond. One thing I like about this podcast, a lot of people kind of get used to hearing from the same people over and over again. They're sort of like the main 5 or 10 people you see at every conference that are talking. And so it's nice to connect my listeners to people that I collaborate with and everything, that you maybe not hear from so much, that are doing some amazing work and gaining some really incredible perspectives that need to be shared with everybody. So I look forward to connecting with more people from ICANNA. And then one day I look forward to getting out there in Slovenia and doing some more direct work there. So thanks so much for being willing to come on. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you very much. I feel very honored to be able to have this conversation with you.
Thank you very much. And everyone listening, thanks so much for listening all the way through. If you want to learn more about Curious About Cannabis, just go to cacpodcast.com or find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, all the main social media places you can find us. And Tanja as well. If you go on YouTube, you can search for either ICANNA or Tanja's name, and you'll find, you've got quite a few presentations that are on YouTube that people can check out and at least get some education in that way too. So I encourage people to check that out. So thanks everybody for listening. I'll connect with you soon. Stay curious and take it easy. If you want to learn more about cannabis, check out the Curious About Cannabis book on Amazon.com and other major online book retailers.